Steve is the acting chief of the Solutions Division within the Information Technology and Communications Directorate at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. Steve serves as the division chief responsible for being the voice of the customer and providing innovative IT solutions to enable the work of Goddard's scientists, engineers, and mission support teams. His division also includes Goddard's growing commercial cloud program and the fledgling digital transformation program. So please welcome Steve Thornton of the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center.
Thank you, Noah. Appreciate the introduction, and I'm gonna do my screen share here. Hopefully it is done correctly. And since I've got a video later on, I am gonna do the include sound. Okay. Can you see the PowerPoint presentation?
Yeah, I see it now. Yeah, it's loaded. It's coming in a little lower resolution, but that might be, but we can see it.
Okay, cool. Okay, so again, I'm Steve Thornton, and thanks to HFI for inviting me to speak today, and Noah for the introduction. This is the topics these are the topics I want to cover, and basically, my goal today is just a call to action. To have more user experience professionals engaged in organizational strategy. I've been dealing with strategy for a long time, and it can be a frustrating process sometimes, and I really think UX folks can add a lot of value here. So I'll talk a little bit real quickly about myself, some definitions, examples of bad strategy is kind of the business case here, how UX professionals can help, and examples of better strategy, and then the Q&A. You know, probably with this audience, this is going to be like speaking to the choir, so to speak. It may be obvious, but it's not so obvious to everyone. Otherwise, I wouldn't have wanted to speak on this topic today. So this is a little bit about me. These are my areas of experience. I received my Certified Usability Analyst certification way back in 2005. And I will say that I've actually never been in a quote unquote user experience organization or had a title of UX in my title, but yet it's almost always been part of my job in some capacity. These are the places I've worked, and just a little pandemic fun. This is my new puppy, relatively new, got her in September. She's a pandemic puppy. She's just turned 10 months old, and her name is Patsy the pug. So just getting some definitions out of the way, strategy, you know, one definition is that it's a framework for making decisions about how an organization will play the game of business. Strategic planning, of course, is the process for defining the strategy or the direction and making decisions on the allocation of scarce resources. And then a little bit about the people involved, and these definitions will be familiar to most of you. And I sometimes use them interchangeably, but I try to be intentional in the way I use them because I'm a good UX person, hopefully. But stakeholders, you know, basic project management, body of knowledge definition, are those people that or organizations that affect or can be affected by a decision, activity, or outcome. Customers are those who pay for goods, deliverables, or services. And then the last one, of course, is the user, someone who utilizes or operates something. So just sort of the driver business case for bad strategy, just, you know, a few examples of strategy gone wrong. I don't know that's necessarily the case that these organizations did not have strategy, but it certainly wasn't the right strategy at a given point in time. You know, Blockbuster, certainly a famous example, failing to innovate and anticipate, you know, the online digital streaming market, and even before that, mail order DVDs. So of course, they're no longer around. Research Emotion, the BlackBerry, which was a great product for a long time. I know we used it in the corporate world, but unfortunately, they failed to keep up with the times, and more specifically, you know, focus more on corporate security requirements and corporate requirements instead of the end user experience. So of course, when smartphones came to the market, they pretty much drove BlackBerry out of the market. And then another one, Radio Shack, and many, many others that failed to really plan and take effect take an effective view of transitioning from brick and mortar to the e-commerce space. There are a lot of other examples, and unfortunately I don't have time to go through all these, but these are just 3 examples. More about bad strategy, as I'll call it. These are indicators of what's in a bad strategy, and I've really divided these up into two categories: the mechanics of the structure and composition of the strategy, and this idea of peoplelessness. And this is where I really want to focus my time later. One of the mistakes is mistaking goals for strategy. So often you'll just see a long list of goals, sometimes not even smart goals. There's been no realism analysis done or on the objective, the goals and objectives that have been proposed, not specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, or timely. A lot of fluff and verbosity, lots of words without saying much at all that's impactful to the stakeholders. One of my favorite things, or actually least favorite thing, is often strategies are a long list of initiatives. And when that happens, you can see the looks on executives' faces because all they see is dollar sign, dollar sign, dollar sign, and they're almost always expensive. Written in the passive voice, this is one that you see in the government a lot, so no one has actually accountability for the strategy. Also in government in particular, lots of bureaucratic speak, and or even outside of government, esoteric, higher order concepts that don't resonate with most people. And again, in government, a lot of my time's been spent in government, obviously. Lots of policy and regulatory drivers, but really no identification of benefits to real people. And so that takes us over to the peoplelessness of some strategies. And this is the digital transformation problem in a lot of cases. And that's over focusing on the technology, like focusing on artificial intelligence or machine learning without actually understanding what you want to get out of the technology. The impact to stakeholders not addressed, or key stakeholder audiences left out. Responsibilities assigned in the strategy to opaque organizations and or to processes. Processes can't just transform themselves. Someone has to own that transformation activity. Not identifying the beneficiaries, so who will actually benefit from the strategy. Failing to inspire or face the challenge at hand, not reaching far enough, perhaps. Doesn't describe the future state and the impacts to real people or the benefits to real people of that future state. And so ultimately, with a peopleless strategy, why should I, as a stakeholder, or anyone else for that matter, care what's in the strategy? So just a couple of brief examples. So this is from the Federal CIO Council, and I'm picking on the federal government a little bit, just mainly because A, that's where I've worked a lot of my time, but also they're actually required very often to publish their strategies, unlike the private sector. And so the Federal CIO Council actually has a set of strategic priorities. This isn't necessarily a strategic plan per se, but it's close to one. And you'll look at their first priority listed on their website is capital planning and investment control. Those of you that work in government IT may know what that is, but honestly, it really fails to inspire and doesn't really cause anyone to reach for anything. Another example that I was involved with is the Federal Health IT strategy. This was the 2015 to 2020 strategy, and I know it's fuzzy. I feel a little more comfortable talking about this one because there's actually a new federal health IT strategy. But you see words in here like transforming healthcare delivery and community health by supporting the delivery of high value healthcare. Okay, so it's actually about the healthcare, not the people. And then the next one is increasing access to and usability of high quality electronic health information and services, which sounds great, lots of words, but again, it doesn't really resonate from a people's perspective. Now, I will give us credit in that there actually is under the cover here for the Federal Health IT strategy, this version, a lot of information about impacts to stakeholders and patients and so forth, but it's an over 100-page document. And I was actually involved in the strategy and I didn't even have time to read the whole thing. So there's that. So this is where I see that UX professionals can really help. And that's my call to action, to be able to help the organization tell the strategic plan story. Hopefully, if I did the audio correctly, this video will work and you'll be able to hear it. And I feel like this video actually can tell the story of why storytelling is important better than I could. So let's give this a shot. If you don't hear anything, Noah, just let me know.
You know, if not, yeah.
Okay, let's resist the urge to start with Once Upon a Time. But to understand why storytelling is important to you, your company, your brands, or your corporate reputation today, we're going to have to go back a bit. The origin of the importance of stories lies in their power to explain. For ancient man, when the crops failed, he wanted to know why. The storytellers that could provide the most engaging explanations for the actions of the gods acquired the biggest and most attentive audiences and began to assume positions of authority. Thus the rise of the priest, judges and rulers, and eventually the popularity of the BBC, Google, and the world's largest repository of personal stories, Facebook. Neurological research shows that our brains, despite evolution, still look for the story to make sense of information today. In fact, in the landmark Hyder and Simmel study, people interpreted a simple animation involving two triangles, a circle and a square, as a torrid tale of love, promiscuity, and domestic violence. Ideas conveyed in story form, especially visual stories, versus concepts explained with logic and analysis, naturally imprint themselves into the brain faster. Stories are also universal, crossing boundaries of culture, language, gender, and age. They're told and retold, building and preserving a group sense of community. Stories align and motivate by portraying the world in terms that build emotional connections between people and create a sense of shared purpose. In an age of ever-increasing noise, in which we send 1 billion tweets a week, read around 10 megabytes of material a day, hear 400 meg, and see 1 meg of information every second, attention is worth more than ever before. And nothing holds attention like a great story.
So, I will argue that being able to tell good stories and storytelling is an essential leadership capability. And so just diving into like how I see the role of UX playing in organizational strategy. This gentleman, Michael Watkins, has a nice framework for talking about the components of strategy, which ultimately drive alignment of resources to organizational objectives. And part of the strategy will typically be the mission and goals, which outline the what it is the organization wants to do, the strategy outlining the how, the vision and incentives outlining the why, and the value network is who, and that's very often not included in a lot of strategies, especially in the government. And so this is where I think user experience can really help out these last two. The value network, the who, really speaks to stakeholders, customers, users, and the why, the incentives are really about improving experiences for our customers and users. So a better approach to strategy in general or digital transformation specifically is to be able to tell stories about, if your planning horizon is 5 years into the future or 10 years in the future, being able to say, what will customers be able to do 5 years from now that they can't do today? What will our employees be able to do that they can't do differently? How will our managers' lives be better in 5 years than they are today? Our system administrators, and in our case at NASA, scientists, what would they be able to do differently, and how will they be enabled in the future? Something that often comes up in digital transformation activities is robots, intelligent agents. And my argument is that even if it's a robot, it's there for a purpose, and that purpose, at least for now, is to serve people and not the other way around. And so really understanding the user experience and the human interface into those intelligent agents is critical to being able to sell the strategy. And so Agile certainly gives us one example of a way to tell stories, or certainly other methods to do this, whether it's day in the life scenarios or what have you. The Agile structure really resonates with me because it's very concise. As a stakeholder, customer, user, I would be able to complete X task in order to achieve some purpose. And this basic structure first and foremost, it places the stakeholder first and in the story. It identifies the core need independent of the technology in most cases. That story can often be applied to multiple channels, and it clearly identifies the value and the outcome. And from my experience, when you ask planners to really talk about the stakeholder or the users in the strategy, it really causes them to think more deeply about the why that they're proposing. And ultimately, it answers the what's in it for me if the stakeholders can see themselves in the story. So just some examples of what I think are badly written strategic statements versus better. Collaboration is important to NASA, and so this one resonates recently with me. We will implement a Zig widget collaboration tool, of which there are many. That probably resonates with you too during the pandemic. But really, just implementing another tool doesn't actually tell you anything. It doesn't describe the benefit in any way. It's, to me, is just cost. And so a better way to explain that would be, as an external research partner, I will be able to access the same authorized systems and data as my government partners using our home organization's credentials in order to integrate our work more effectively. And when I've talked about our strategy for collaboration in that way, it certainly resonated much more with our science and other leadership than, just implementing another tool. Another good example that you'll often see is the balanced scorecard to support senior management or other kinds of reporting or machine learning kind of activities to support various business operations. A better way to say that is, as a senior decision maker, I have access to near real-time information about critical projects, finances, human resources, operations, and customers in order to make timely decisions about the business. Not perfect, but it's certainly, to me, better. And then the example of the robot or the artificial intelligence. Bad example, we will use AI in order to make our HR processes more effective. Better, again, getting at the benefit and the stakeholder. As a new employee, I'll be able to communicate with an intelligent agent, maybe a chat bot, to ask questions about the onboarding and orientation process and to check my status in order to make my onboarding process a seamless, pleasant, and more cost-effective experience. And I can guarantee you stories written like that will sell better when selling the strategy than the former. So just some parting words from my experience. UX skills and thinking are not common in many organizations. Certainly, it may be more common in some private sector organizations, but in the nonprofit world, the not-for-profit world, and the public sector, it's certainly a rare thing. UX professionals are strongly equipped to uncover and craft the stakeholder-centric stories that can improve the organization's strategy, whether through user research, being able to articulate user and other stakeholder requirements, step up to the plate to support strategy. If not you, then who else? Speaking from personal experience, don't get frustrated. Incremental progress and writing better strategy is still progress. Personally, I've had mixed success. But it's great to see the lights come on in people's heads whenever you can describe the future state in a more effective way. And that should leave us time for questions. I'll just mention I do have some backup slides, just given the short time I had to present, but I mocked up quickly about what an example of a more user-centric or UX-centric strategic planning process, what that might look like. It's not a robust, process, but it's just an example. I also wanted to include an example of what I think is a really exceptional use of future state storytelling, and that's with the some old videos the Internet Society had put out in 2010 that talked about the future of internet in a user-centric way, and then some more examples of bad to better strategic statements. And so that is it for my presentation. So let me go back to the Zoom.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so reminder, guys, please put your questions in the Q&A box, and please upvote the questions you'd like to hear the answers to. I'm noticing a couple of things in the chat box. Some folks are asking, and it's actually in the Q&A box too. People are asking about the YouTube video you showed earlier, if that's on YouTube, if people can see that, get a link to it maybe.
Yeah, it is on YouTube, and the link will be in the PowerPoints when they share them out.
Okay. And someone also demanded, really, I think they wanted to see the strategy thing you were talking about.
Also in the backup. Now, I will say that strategy I really wrote out in like 5 minutes. So this is not a huge formulated process. It really takes the strategic planning process and says, okay, how can we use UX methods as part of that process, or integrate UX methods into that process? Any other questions?
So other questions, please put them in the Q&A. There's a question here that, oh, there we go. A question here that is asked, to sum this up, is it all skills of a UX writer?
Say that again, Noah?
Someone, Prema asked, to sum this up, is it all skills of a UX writer?
Skills of a UX writer. I guess I'm not quite following that. I mean, part of the process is actually understanding the user requirements. And so ideally it would be great if we had the ability to reach out to users directly, conduct robust user research, other stakeholder research as part of our strategic planning process. At least in a lot of the strategic planning initiatives I've seen in the government, mainly, that's not always possible. And so it's usually a group of stakeholders sitting around anticipating what they view the needs to be. But even in that kind of scenario, yes, being able to translate it and tell the story in a way that will actually resonate with people that are making decisions about the strategy and or who are implementing the strategy or maybe impacted by the strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think what you're talking about is just people who are making content for like writing text or something for the site in that kind of sense. So this idea of, it doesn't sound to me like that would be a good summary from what I'm seeing, to be respectful, all the same, right? What are some of the things that you would highlight that people are, that the staff are doing other than writing?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean,
Or,
for me, like these have been, first of all, every strategic planning process I've been through has been a little different. The worst ones I've been through are spread over a year or two of stakeholders sitting in a room and arguing about priorities and initiatives. Like I said, usually costly initiatives. The better ones, you're locked into a room for a couple of weeks, focusing on writing the strategy. But the thing I think that UX people bring that others just don't naturally bring to the table is really being able to have that empathy and to be able to think about the users, thinking, even if it's in your head, trying to, construct a user profile or persona of the stakeholders, the customers are impacted by the strategy, and then be able to help the strategic planning group translate those into a way that will resonate with the audience for the strategy.
Yeah. Maybe it's kind of what a strategy is and what that builds towards isn't very clear for some of the folks listening. So, I mean, the strategy isn't just it's not just a content strategy. It's not just a strategy for what we're writing, right? It's a what else does a strategy include?
First of all, it could be lots of different kind of strategy. Most of the organizational strategies I've been involved with are at the agency level. And so we're setting out the priorities for the agency as a whole, or the strategy for technology for that agency. And so it's really about identifying how we're going to prioritize our investments into what technology, what capabilities. Hopefully it's not just about the technology, but transforming processes and our experiences for customers.
Yeah. So there are processes that are way beyond just writing and editing, as far as like content kinds of writing and editing. It sounds like, and it sounds like as far as the things that are being worked on, probably more than just content, navigation, interaction, presentation, stuff like that, right?
Yeah. So just to clarify, I mean, this is not what I'm talking about. It's not UX strategy. It's really about having a more a UX centric organizational strategy for how the organization is carrying out its operations or its business. And so, no, this is not a UX strategy. It's not a web strategy or a content strategy.
Awesome. All right. Next question. Pooja asks, what are the qualities of a strategy, let's say a strategic UX thinker?
I think I kind of outlined some of them earlier. I mean, as a UX professional, you bring certain skills, in particular methods and tools that you've learned through your training and application and projects. to really try to understand, okay, first and foremost, who are the stakeholders that we're talking about that are impacted by the strategy? And as a subset of those stakeholders, the customers and or end users, a lot of times those are the same thing, but not necessarily in all cases. And so really talking about the people, bringing the people into the center, and then being able to understand what the needs are, and then tell the story in a way that will resonate with the stakeholders. I'll say where I get tripped up sometimes myself is that there's a fair amount of persuasion that has to be done here, because the business schools teach a certain way of writing strategy or doing strategy or writing strategy, and you'll very often see the vision, goals, objectives, and then the initiatives, and then it stops there. And so that's typically the framework that you'll see, and that's just what all the consultants, I'm not going to name any consultants' names here, but that's what they push. And so being able to use influence to be able to navigate that and speak with some authority as a UX professional, I think is really helpful.
Awesome.
I'm sure there's other traits that I'm not thinking of right now.
That's great. Kalpana asks, can you please share some thoughts about UX strategy for corporate websites like .com, .org kinds of sites versus internal applications?
So again, this topic was less about UX strategy, but I've been involved with public websites, internal websites, applications, both for the web and not on the web, in the public and private sector. And the methodologies we use are the same. Maybe, I always think of it as we've got our toolbox, and for any one project, we may pull different tools from the toolbox to be able to apply them to the project. But always, at the core of that is understanding the users involved, actually the business context of what the organization is trying to do and what the users actually need, and uncovering that knowledge. Usually the overlap with those two categories of information really is the value proposition that we're going after, and then diving down into the detailed or the conceptual detailed design process, testing, etc. That's the same regardless of whether or not it's an internal website or a public website. The process is the same. I will say in government in particular, when I worked at Nextel, it was the only time that I ever recall actually being able to go to a lab and watch users in a lab setting behind the one-way mirror, so to speak, to be able to learn how they're using the website. And by the way, that was in the early 2000s, so it was a long time ago. Ever since then, it's always been about the lightweight mobile usability lab. So usually it's a usability analyst. Maybe you're lucky if you got a camera with a workstation, a conference room, or you're doing it remotely. So that's much more common to see.
Makes sense. Yeah, I know in my experience that that term UX strategy feels like I've seen that mean 7 different things and all at 7 different levels of like micro and macro. So I hear where you're coming from with that. Looks like we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more. This one might be quick. Does NASA hire UX specialists?
Well, I'm working for NASA. One of my employees that just joined from another agency also has a UX background, but based on some of the teams I've sat on, and again, I work in the IT organization, and so there aren't a lot of us there. Certainly on the human exploration side, there's a whole human factors organization to support the human exploration missions that are focused on that. I saw there was a question about Crew Dragon capsule. So there's human factors organizations, Johnson Space Center, I'm sure, to support those activities. And we have UX people throughout NASA that usually, if they're on a web team or maybe they're on we've got at Goddard, for example, we have a science data visualization studio. And so those folks certainly have design skills and UX skills on top of like more hardcore data visualization skills. So yeah, we definitely hire them, but to my knowledge, we don't have a user experience organization. That would certainly be nice.
All right, and maybe time for, well, okay, time for one last one. Daniel asked, does strategy need to come from the top of the organization or can it bubble up from the middle?
I guess where the top is depends on where you're sitting. Like, I am,
It's a good point.
you know, so in my experience, it almost always bubbles up from where I've been. But you know, a lot of times it's folks in the middle management layer that are all involved in strategic planning, and then we're trying to translate between, you know, the needs of the workforce and feedback from the workforce versus the executives that don't necessarily have a lot of time to sit in strategic planning meetings. But again, that work has to be able to resonate with those executives, and I've seen lots of cases where it doesn't.
Yeah.
So it becomes shelfware. You know, that's not always the case, but
Yeah.
from what I've seen, you know, it's usually the most senior executives are going to see the output and then, you know, redline it perhaps. But again, that's based on my experiences. I will,
right.
let me just caveat that with saying,
please.
so you know, I've been talking about organizational strategy, and there's different levels of organizational strategy. I can almost assure you that NASA's highest level science and human exploration mission strategy, they actually have absolutely have a say in, along with a lot of other internal and external stakeholders, but not necessarily are they involved in every organizational strategy.
Awesome. All right. Everyone, please give Steve a warm thank you in the chat box. Thank you so much, Steve. All right.